So the lady that donated that, it was a really interesting story. She said that her mother would head for the feed store, and they didn't like to see her coming because she always wanted the fabric that was the sacks that were on the bottom of the pile. And so they would have to deconstruct the entire pile of chicken feed to get to the fabric that she wanted. So she was actually looking for fabric to make her daughter's dresses, and then with the leftover pieces of fabric, she made this quilt. And it's just a really amazing quilt. It's a nice, substantial quilt, though that fabric was nice and heavy. So,
where does it date from? What's the year?
About 1945.
Okay, and then this quilt made by the 7-year-old.
Yes, she started this quilt in 1909, and she was 7 years old. And it's a variation on, it's a 4-patch variation on a 9-patch, I believe. You see, you've got your 2 solid squares, and then you've got your 2 9-patch squares. And it's clearly been used a lot. She did a great job. It's hung together very well. It's in really good condition. And it's wonderful to see that this is a quilt that's been used, made by a child, and then used so much. The log cabin motif here in the center of this quilt top is a popular one. It's still very much used today. And that quilt, I like that quilt top because of the story behind it with the little girl who got the sewing machine and was so thrilled that the first thing that she made was a quilt top. And I also like the colors in that. That's really nicely done.
And I wonder if new jewel sewing machines still exist.
Probably not.
Probably not today. Well, let's talk about the bird quilt and the autograph quilt.
So the bird quilt was made by Cedar Falls resident Sigrid Wood, and she made another embroidered quilt that was the state flowers. This one is the state birds, and it's a really amazing quilt, beautifully done, all in satin stitch embroidery. It includes Hawaii, so it was.
So she had to make this in the 50s and 60s, or
I believe that I dated it to the 1955 to 60 is when I dated it to. Yeah, it's very bright and I really love it. The autograph quilt is really interesting. It was purchased at auction over by Fredsville, and the people who donated thought it had something to do with the Danish community. But I've done some research on the names on the quilt. They are not Danish names, and it appears to have something to do with veterans of the Civil War. So I'm going to continue to do some research on that because I find that fascinating.
Would this have been something they might have made in a church or made for
possibly,
fundraiser or some sort?
Possibly for some sort of fundraiser or some event that happened, like a founding of GAR in their community. It's hard to say. If I've looked for newspaper articles that might support, what happened when this was made, but it was a fairly popular thing to make quilts to raise money for churches. And
you almost wonder if it was made by different people because the script is not the same on every square.
It is somewhat different the way that they're embroidered, and so that would have been very typical for the people to have made separate blocks, and then they would have been all quilted together. So yes, that's a good point, and hopefully I can continue to research it and find out.
How do you research something like that? Where do you look?
Well, the first thing I do is I start by trying to figure out who these people were, where they lived, and that's how I actually found out that this probably doesn't have anything to do with Iowa. I mean, it does have something to do with Iowa to the extent that it ended up in Iowa, but most of the people on this quilt seem to have lived in Illinois, and specifically in one small community, the name of which escapes me right now. But they all were of the age that they had served in the Civil War, and that's why I think it has something to do with that. I don't think they were all members of the same church. So yeah, I start off basically with the genealogical research and then expand upon that.
What kind of fabric is it? Is it cotton? And
It appears to me to be a cotton, yeah, just very simple fabric.
Okay. Well, let's talk about the crazy quilts, because I think those are very intriguing. And you have one in the collection that is particularly interesting because of its provenance.
Yes. The quilt top in the back of this case was made by Pauline Robb. She was John Robb's daughter, and John Robb was the potter in Cedar Falls for many, many years. And she made this quilt in 1877 when she was 12 years old. And it has just an amazing amount of embroidery on it. I just love all the symbolism on it, the fact that she was practicing her stitching, her embroidery stitches, but quite frankly, she doesn't appear to have needed to practice because they seem to have come off very well in this quilt. And there's just so much going on in this quilt with the symbols like the anchor, her initials, another initial. We've got owls. We've got a lot of flowers, and some things that there's a boat and butterflies. It's just a wonderful quilt. I really love it.
And the importance of crazy quilts. Where is the fabric from? Were they leftover pieces of fabric from clothing and that sort of thing?
A lot of people did use leftover suiting and other fabrics from their remnant basket, but they also could buy packaged bits of fabric to add color and texture, because a lot of women maybe wouldn't have had the velvets and satins and silks in their sewing baskets. So that actually was something that they could do, was to buy those kits. And but I think that the three quilts that we have on exhibit here on this side seem to all have been made from fabric remnants, because they are more utilitarian fabrics.
Yeah, you see men's suiting,
yeah,
shirts,
yes,
probably old dresses, children's pieces.
Yeah. This quilt, I wonder if perhaps the fabric for this quilt wasn't specifically purchased, because it seems to be, what am I going to say? It doesn't look like it was ever used. It doesn't look. It's only a few different colors.
There's a lot of continuity.
Yes, there is.
In it.
Yes.
In the colors and the styles and.
Yeah. But still, it still has that wonderful embroidery on it. So.
What do the backs of these look like? I'm just curious. Are
well,
they all quilted yet, or some of them just the tops, or?
The tops are quilted. The backs are often just tied, the top to the back. Of course, the quilt top does not have a back on it. One of these quilts has a really nice flannel backing on it, and I think that must have been a really nice warm quilt to have on the bed. So.
All right, well, let's talk a little bit about this and what you've put together for people to try to find the kind of an I Spy game for people.
Well, this is a cathedral window quilt, and it's just amazing. The time and the painstaking stitching that goes into creating these little windows of color on this background. A lot of cathedral window quilts are made with a white background. We've created an I Spy, so people can come in and try to find particular patterns within these little windows. And the quilter used just a wide variety of calicos and print fabric, and some of them have some really sweet and funny motifs in them. So I love all of the quilts in the show. But this one is just, I find it amazing.
Well, one last area to talk about are the children's quilts and the doll quilts. And let's talk about this one and this one in particular.
Well, this quilt is really amazing. It's beautifully done. It's tumbling block pattern, and it dates from, it was made in upstate New York, actually. and it's on loan. It does not belong to the Historical Society, but it's satins and silks and rayons, and it's just an amazing quilt. Not with a very thick quilting in it, but you can see how some of the more fragile fabrics have degraded there, especially the silks. But it's other than that, it's a remarkable.
When does that date from?
I think that was to 1890s.
1890s.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now this one is a very special meaning for you, the yellow and pastel, yellow and white.
Yes.
Talk to me about the meaning of this quilt.
Well, that actually is my childhood quilt. And it was made by my great-grandmother. And it's very, it's cotton fabric, it's very lightweight, well worn, and each alternating block she embroidered a little story, basically, that she thought that I would like. And so it's got like little elephants, and it was very difficult to decide which of the blocks to show, since I like them all. But I've shown the little person out fishing in the boat, and the baseball player in the little train, and it's tied through. It's not a real heavyweight quilt, but it's a very nice quilt.
Did you use this quilt as a child? Was it on your bed?
I did use the quilt, yes, I did, and I have very fond memories of it. Very nice quilt.